I begin, I'd like to refer you to my register of members' interests for the support I received from the excellent Researching Asylum and Migration Policy Group. I'd also like to pay tribute to the organisations in my constituency and across Yorkshire, such as the South Yorkshire Migration and Asylum Action Group, Sheffield City of Sanctuary, Sheffield Assist, Time to Be Out, and so many more, who do such vital work in supporting asylum seekers and refugees in my region. The Nationalities and Borders Bill is a wide-ranging piece of legislation, and there are so many problems with it that it's been difficult for members to address them all as it's passed through Parliament. Today, I want to shed some light on the potentially devastating impact this legislation has on LGBTQ+ asylum seekers and refugees. I've spoken to many campaigners advocating on the behalf of LGBTQ+ communities, and every organisation I've contacted is appalled by this bill. They're appalled because LGBTQ+ people seeking sanctuary are already met with a system full of obstacles and challenges. In a world where homosexuality is still illegal in 70 countries and punishable by death in 11, it is shocking that across Europe, 1 in 3 LGBTQ+ asylum applications are refused because officials simply do not believe the applicant. According to Sussex University, 4 in 10 people report being rejected because decision-makers do not consider they are persecuted or at risk of persecution in their home country, while more than a third felt interviewers didn't listen to their story or ask the relevant questions. In the UK, the story is no less bleak. Around 2,000 people fleeing persecution for their sexual orientation seek asylum here every year. Only about a quarter of these applications are granted by the Home Office, yet when they are challenged, almost half of those who have been refused win their appeals. Those numbers alone tell you that something is very wrong at the Home Office. They speak to what researchers at the University of Sussex have described as a culture of disbelief. That culture is a symptom of a wider hostile environment for migrants, refugees and asylum seekers, and as ever, it is the very most vulnerable who suffer the most. To understand why ministers should put themselves in their shoes of someone running from violence and abuse from their sexuality or gender identity, to truly understand what this is like to go through. Currently, under UK law, to be granted asylum, you must demonstrate that if you are forced to return to your country of origin, there is a reasonable degree of likelihood you would be persecuted. You're compelled to prove your sexual orientation to Home Office officials who, as I've already said, have been told to be intensely suspicious of anything you say to them. I will.
I had a constituent who was from Venezuela, and he was told to return. He had married, in fact, a British person, and he was told that he could be more discreet in Venezuela and have no problem, and then return via the marriage route. So he had no problem and shouldn't worry. Is there not a problem that the Home Office look at the technical processes rather than the human being, and they expect people to be able to fit into boxes that are not them?
I completely agree, and I have huge sympathy with your constituent, because that is a story that I am sure has been told many times before. So, just to move on then, just to imagine that you're an LGBTQ+ person who lives in one of those countries where homosexuality is illegal, or even that you live where it is punishable by death. You live in a constant fear of being outed. Every day is a struggle to erase any evidence of your identity. And if you fail, if you slip up, or you accidentally reveal that you're gay or bisexual, or that you do not feel at home in the gender society has assigned you, you'll face horrific consequences. You'll finally manage to escape. After what has probably been a very traumatic journey, you find yourself in an interview room in the UK. What will you say when you sit down with the Home Office officials and they ask you to produce evidence of your identity, the same evidence you've been erasing your entire life? How will you prove anything to them? You might think of contacting a former romantic partner from your country of origin, but what if they're unwilling to provide the evidence for fear of being outed too? Or even worse, what if they've already been imprisoned or even killed for their gender, identity or sexuality? You can't even rely on family members who often don't feel safe enough to write a statement for the Home Office. They may have even disowned you for your identity. Instead of seeking the right to right these wrongs and address this impossible situation, the Nationalities and Borders Bill increases the burden of proof for asylum applications. Clause 31 in the bill says that instead of a reasonable degree of likelihood, the threshold should be far higher and a level should be based on a balance of probabilities that you'll face persecution if you return. And what if you don't even have the language to describe your own sexuality and gender identity? What if you've come from a culture which describes them in very different terms? I've recently heard from a woman who had been accused of witchcraft in her home country for having relationships with other women. After violence and intimidation, she fled to the UK, where she said she faced persecution for witchcraft to officials. Officials simply did not understand. They looked on in confusion and denied her application. It was only after living here for some months that she had the words to say and describe herself as a lesbian. These are not isolated stories. The people who come here have been brutalised and traumatised. They often can't immediately find the words to describe what they've been through and why. In many cases, they're explaining those difficult and complex experiences in a language that isn't their own and that doesn't easily translate. Proposals in the bill make the life for people like that woman and countless others much harder. Under new measures, people could be forced to produce relevant evidence by a fixed date. If they miss this deadline, the new legislation allows for it to be given minimal weight. Chair, evidence is evidence. You don't stop being LGBTQ+ over time, and the threat to your well-being in your country of origin doesn't diminish either. Any legal pretense that it does will have devastating impacts on the most vulnerable LGBTQ+ people. For them, it's already a challenge to gather evidence. For many, proving your sexual orientation or gender identity is impossible. For some, explaining it is difficult. But there are also so many reasons why you simply wouldn't want to disclose your sexuality or gender identity to people that you do not know and do not trust. The asylum system is not a hospitable place at the moment if you are openly LGBTQ+. As we process asylum applications, it is bitterly and cruelly ironic that we often incarcerate people who in their own country of origin face prison sentences for their identity and sexuality. LGBTQ+ people already face disproportionate levels of abuse in the asylum centre system. Detaining more people who make asylum claims will only make those statistics worse. The new rules for the so-called Group 2 refugees also discourage LGBTQ+ people from telling their stories with their genuine claims for asylum. The UN has already said that the distinction in the bill between Group 1 and Group 2 refugees undermines the 1951 Refugee Convention. But, Chair, I'm also worried that by giving one group of refugees lesser temporary rights and ratcheting up the uncertainty they face, it could also force LGBTQ+ refugees to continue to hide their identity for fear of being returned to the home country. After all, why would you disclose your sexuality and gender ID if you knew that you could be deported? It could be used to press charges against you once you are sent home and put you at further risk. I know the government are aware of some of these issues, and organisations like Rainbow Migration, a group fighting for LGBTQ+ people in the UK immigration system, have been loudly sounding the alarm. In September 2021, the Equality Impact Assessment for the bill admitted that it risked indirectly disadvantaging protected groups, including LGBTQ+ people. 6 days after the publication of that assessment, I questioned the Minister in Parliament. Back then, he said he was new to his role and had to get up to speed before he could comment in full. Now he's had time to do his homework. I look forward to hearing what he will do. He told me then that he fully expects the government will be sympathetic in taking proper account of the issues that I raised. So I'd like to reach out to all members in the hall today. The Nationality and Borders Bill will be returning to the House soon. When we draft and debate legislation like this, we write the future stories of countless thousands fleeing the worst of circumstances. Every pen stroke of every amendment can make the difference to some of the most vulnerable people in the world. Every day, LGBTQ+ people flee from violence, threats and abuse. But you cannot flee from who you are. As legislators, you and I can choose. We can either allow these horrific experiences to follow them here, inscribing yet another chapter of trauma into their lives, of people who have already suffered enough, or we can turn the page and write something new. And I hope that's what every member in this room chooses to do as the bill comes back to the House in coming weeks.